Remember when Tim Burton and Johnny Depp cared about making movies? Man, what a time to be alive that was. It's time to put on your 3D goggles and take a trip back to the 1950s as we review the charming character study that is Ed Wood right here at Esoterica Cinema. Hello peoples and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the program where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. My name is Jason Peters, and with me as always is the man who regularly wrestles alligators to settle his very considerable bar tabs, Mr. Ryan Seybold!
Ooh, what's up, Jason? How's it going, buddy?
It is going well, man. I am here to discuss movies with you. We've got a hell of a movie today. Ryan, do you have a description for us, buddy?
I do. From 1994, directed by Tim Burton, this is Ed Wood. Google has this described as: because of his eccentric habits and bafflingly strange films, director Ed Wood, played by Johnny Depp, is a Hollywood outcast. Nevertheless, with the help of the formerly famous Bela Lugosi and a devoted cast and crew of show business misfits who believe in Ed's off-kilter vision, the filmmaker is able to bring his oversized dreams to cinematic life. This was made on a budget of 18 mil and brought in a box office at 13.8, so womp womp. Was shot by Stefan Sapsky, who previously shot things like Batman Returns and Edward Scissorhands for Tim Burton, before he ventured off and went another direction than Sapsky. Sapsky went on to go shoot things like Matilda, and previously shot things like one of your favorite cult hits, Vampire's Kiss, with Nicolas Cage. So there's a bit. Yeah, it's such a weird movie, right? I have not seen it. I cannot wait to get to that. But yeah, this one, this was a first watch for me. I'd never seen this before. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would call that a cinematic confession. That's not really like cinematic confession styles.
Yeah,
but,
there's a lot of people that haven't seen this movie, I would imagine.
It just, for whatever reason, kept falling off my radar. I don't know why I never saw it. I'm a huge Tim Burton guy. I love Tim Burton, especially this era of Tim Burton. This kind of fell right in between, I believe, Batman Returns and Mars Attacks, both of which I love very much. So I don't know why this just never really came into my purview, but I was glad to watch it for the show. I liked it a lot. And I'm curious to what you think. So much so, as I will say, as always, Jason, what did you think about this movie, bud?
And Ryan, as always, I'm going to be happy to tell you. But first, do want to ask our audience, please go ahead and like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. Really helps us out. As well, please leave some comments along the way. We would love to hear from you about what you think about what we have to say or your own thoughts on the film as we move forward. Ryan, to answer your question directly, I adored this movie. I love this movie. Now, unlike yourself, just a little bit of background, I've actually seen this movie many times. I grew up with this film to a degree. This is actually, so funny thing, I think I've mentioned this before in other episodes, that like, I was kind of like a squeamish kid. Like I really didn't like a lot of like gore and violence and stuff like that. So
Sure.
I didn't really watch a lot of like R-rated films when I was younger. But this was like an R-rated film that was like just barely an R-rated film, right? For maybe like
I was
a couple
shocked
like
to find out this was rated
something.
R.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I agree. I really thought that maybe they could have just cut one or two F-bombs out and probably gotten away with a PG-13. Now,
That's what
it
I
is
was
the
thinking.
90s, and there's, you know, I guess what at the time might be considered frank depiction of like transvestites and transsexuals, which maybe
Also
there was
what I was
additional
wondering,
weight
yeah.
at that time, you know, where maybe it wouldn't register as much right now because it's just a lot more in the social mindset. So yeah, who's to say? But either way, a very PG-13 level R-rated film. So this was one that I actually grew up with because it wasn't squeamish at all, and I was able to quite enjoy it. And it's just charming. It's just charming as hell, you know?
It is.
Not only the film's message, but the way that the characters are portrayed, the relationship between Ed Wood and Bela Lugosi, and just all of the other ancillary characters as well. You know, it's one of those films where it's like, I think the most dislikable character would maybe be the Sarah Jessica Parker character, but even then she's not really that dislikable. She just kind of isn't like of that world, right?
Sure.
So, but yeah, but everybody's very likable. Everybody plays these sort of exaggerated versions of the characters, and also just some really wonderful score accompaniment from Howard Shore. How about you, man? As a first time view, how was it for you?
Oh, I love this movie for all the reasons that I loved Bowfinger. This is
Nice.
a very similar kind of tale.
Plucky young filmmakers, right?
Yes. And all the shenanigans that go along with having no budget and trying to do things renegade style back in the day, before the oh-so-convenient world of digital came to our doorstep. But yeah, no permits, going around Hollywood, trying to make it big and acting like big shots and, schmoozing. Even the scene of Ed Wood, going in and trying to schmooze Vampira, played excellently by Lisa Marie. This was, one of their, I believe this was their first of many films together. I don't think they had done one before this, but of course she went on to go do the big bubble-headed alien blonde from Mars Attacks. And then it was even in like Sleepy Hollow and a couple others, I think. So Lisa Marie's fantastic. I think she was in Big Fish. Don't quote me on that. But anyways, yeah, she did a great job. But like when Ed Wood goes in to go schmooze her and she doesn't even know who Ed Wood was, it was very reminiscent of when Bowfinger was in the restaurant and had the fake cell phone and, hey, baby.
Robert Downey Jr.'s character trying to impress him.
Correct. Yeah, and the cell phone is like, it got a cord on it or whatever it was attached to nothing. So, it had a lot of those elements. But Johnny Depp, this was his most charming era. This is the heyday of Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
So, again, this is post Edward Scissorhands by just a movie or two. And so, he's right smack in it. His career is about to explode if it hasn't already. So, it's also just sweet spot Tim Burton, like you said in the cold open. This is that heyday of Tim Burton too, coming off of things like Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns. He goes on to do Mars Attacks and Sleepy Hollow and all these fun movies that are just this wonderful time capsule of Burton-esque films that kind of made him who he is. So
yeah, we see this a lot with certain filmmakers where they didn't start out necessarily huge mainstream successes, right? So they're still hungry. They're, enthused by their art. They really want to make stuff to impress people. They want to put themselves on the page and on celluloid and just really make these personal films. So even a film like Pee-wee's Big Adventure still has, you can tell it's like a very personal film for Tim Burton that he's telling,
Sure.
Whereas later on in his career, now he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's told all the stories he wants to tell. He's kind of just doing everything for the money. You can just tell that, the passion in the later part of his career, pretty much right around once he started doing the two Alice in Wonderland remake movies, right? I think
Correct.
that's where he really kind of fell off. And so,
Willy Wonka. Yeah, it was right around that era.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's really nice to go back to when you can tell that this is a dude that still really cares about cinema, really wants to do it justice, even down to him fighting for insisting on shooting it in black and white, which seemed to have gotten him in trouble with the studio, and they put it on the back burner from what I understand because of that.
Yeah, he stood on his laurels.
Yeah. So if we're going to break down this film as we do, I would say that the film succeeds primarily on the strength, first of all, on the strength of the acting and the characterizations. I think we've also got a solid script that creates these really strong bonds among these untraditional people, especially people of different sexuality. And it includes the embracing of our protagonist, right, as both transvestite as well as a very passionate filmmaker. And then we have an actor who's portraying both of these things with good-hearted aplomb and, sensitivity and enthusiasm and gusto. And I think that's a huge part of what makes this work. So you kind of touched on it. Let's start by discussing the acting and the characterization. We've kind of touched before on how, there's two different things. We've got the characterization work being done by the script as well as the actors, and that's sort of the characters that are brought to life on screen before us. And then we've got the actors and how well they're actually doing portraying those characters, right? So how did you feel about some of the different characters? Which were the ones that stood out to you the most and did a lot of the heavy lifting for you?
Well, I mean, it's got to be Landau as Bela Lugosi, right? I mean, that's...
Of course, yeah.
That's the meat on this bone. I mean, obviously...
Such an amazing performance.
Johnny Depp as the titular Ed Wood was great. And, his dental fixture and his little lisp and all his mannerisms and how he, like you said, approached transgenderism and cross-dressing and stuff like that, all very sensitively. That was all done very well. But, man, it was his relationship with Landau that really shined. And I know that... I'm sure you read this too, but this was a personal film for Burton because it mirrored his relationship with Vincent Price in his final days. working together on films like Edward Scissorhands and so forth. He was very, very fond of Vincent and made some homages to him in his early days of animation work and stuff like that. So, that was always kind of a role model of his. And so then you get into Ed Wood and his relationship with Bela Lugosi. And so this, I think that Tim Burton took a lot of sensitive care with that relationship. And I think that is the heart of the film, right? Of course, it's behind the scenes. It's all the fun and whimsy of Ed Wood making these small budget films and all the hijinks that ensue in this ragtag group of characters. But at the heart of it is his relationship and bond with Bela Lugosi, played by Martin Landau wonderfully.
Beware. Take care. Be fair. Wait! Pull the string! Pull the string!
Cut.
But aside from that, you've got the Tor character, you've got Jeffrey Jones, you've got, who actually is kind of a troubling actor now, but back then, he was wonderful in this film, just speaking about his performance. And I was shocked that Elfman was not along for this ride. You think that would be a shoo-in for a movie like this.
Yeah.
But Howard Shore did a very suitable job scoring this movie.
If you can't get him, dude, Howard Shore is a perfectly fine backup, And this is a guy.
Right.
I also think it's just hysterical that this is the same dude that did Cronenberg's first half dozen films or whatever. Right?
Yeah, Howard Shore's a guy, right? That guy's a character.
Yeah, but this film the score is so jaunty and lighthearted, and it's just such a stark contrast to the work of Cronenberg. And you see that all throughout Howard Shore's career. Dude did Lord of the Rings, but I think
Silence of the Lambs. The movies he does too have been judged very well by history and hindsight, but at the time, they were probably all very big risks and big swings. Lord of the Rings was a mess before it wasn't. Passing through several studios' hands and, nobody really knew what he was doing. And it took 20 years to make this damn thing and all this nonsense. Silence of the Lambs, this crazy movie about this serial killer and, all this nonsense. And then all of a sudden it goes on to win all the Oscars. So it's Howard Shore's the shit. But it could have gone the other way really easily.
Yeah, I just thought it was so charming to watch Johnny Depp in this, performance from when he was younger. It's unfortunate now because it's just hard not to think of him as a kind of bloated drunk who goes through very public divorces in a very messy fashion. But back in the day, man, he was such a unique performer. He always was very stubborn about bringing his own unique energy. And as a result, his characters were always very unique, but he knew what he was doing, It was to all of our benefit that he was kind of stubborn about that. He was a little bit quirky and difficult, maybe from the standpoint that they couldn't necessarily get him to take the roles that he wanted to. They really wanted him to be this romantic interest leading man that he just wasn't interested in. And, especially because, he's obviously a very attractive dude, very handsome, could have been just, a $20 million romantic comedy dude very easily. And it's unfortunate that, he was so steadfast to his artistic morals, let's call them, back in the day. Whereas now he's just you could tell he's oh yeah, no, I owe Amber $30 million. Let's go ahead and do Pirates 18. So,
yeah.
It's a little bit unfortunate, but
it really is. But watching this was a time capsule for me because it took me back into those days when I really did love Johnny Depp. I love Sleepy Hollow. I love, I did not love The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. That wasn't really my shtick. Yeah.
I really like Sweeney Todd. I thought it was good.
I probably deserve to give it another watch.
With that film. Yeah.
I
I'm not a musical guy too.
Watch.
I'm not if somebody was to come and say hey, I know about musicals. Here's all the reasons that the film adaptation wasn't very good. I'd be I can't speak music, right? All I can do is just tell you that I enjoyed the film, but I get that.
Sure.
And as far as the Martin Landau performance, we didn't mention, but he did win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and it's 100% deserved here. And also, the other Oscar went to our boy Rick Baker. Who, is did the one of the more famous transformation sequences in American Werewolf in London. And, he's done the Men in Black, he's done Nutty Professor, just super, super storied guy. So for him to do Bela Lugosi and do that makeup, like it was, really on par. And I'm sure that it helped Martin Landau get into his performance as well. We even hear that, like, Rick Baker did the Grinch for Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey said once he was in that, right, it's just really easy to get into character. So, but I think the most interesting and impressive thing about it is that whereas all of those other instances of prosthetics are like very obvious, right? Like it's very obvious it's Eddie Murphy and heavy prosthetics. It's very obvious it's Jim Carrey and heavy prosthetics. Like Martin Landau doesn't look like he's in a fake mask. Like he looks
not at all
like that's how he really looks. Like
right.
If you had told me that they just, applied light makeup and there wasn't any, prosthetics on his face, like I would buy it. It's all very, very natural. I think that's one of the most impressive things about it.
So I watched an interview with Rick Baker on this, and a couple things. Number one, he did it pretty much for free as a labor of love. He was a huge Bela Lugosi fan, and he just wanted to make sure that this performance did Lugosi justice. And so he's like, if you're going to get in on this, I'm going to make sure this is done right. And so just let me do it, please. And so his big concern is that Landau...
Rick Baker, twist our arm.
I know.
We'll let you touch our makeup.
Go ahead. I guess. But yeah, his biggest concern was some differences in Landau's face. Landau notoriously has very large lips, especially a large upper lip. So Lugosi does not. He has more thin lips. So yeah, it was a very minimalist approach, but it was more of shaping the face to look like Lugosi. And damn it if he didn't do a great job. I think it was a great homage to a great performer. And then in some of his older, sicklier moments, to make him kind of age and wear with time too. I think Baker was involved in some of the makeup and prosthetics and stuff like that to help Lugosi, kind of as he's going through, because he was a morphine addict. For anyone that doesn't know, this film tackles some very serious elements, and that's something we could talk about next is the tone versus the story, because it is kind of a dark story and it's got some darker elements. It's a tragedy, but told through the lens of, rose-colored glasses, if you will. But yeah, Rick Baker kind of handled some of that, and he definitely deserved the Oscar. It's just, it's interesting because, if you're going to give an Oscar to, best makeup or whatever it was, you would think that would be a grandiose makeup job, like you're saying from some of these big fantasy films or something like that. But this wasn't. This was a minimalist approach.
Yeah, and it works really well.
But yeah, that something that made it, something that made this really interesting to me was, again, going back to my point just a second ago, is that this was a very tragic tale told through the lens of, this was almost how I feel like this was almost how Ed Wood would have told his own story. This is how he would have seen it, because you're never the villain of your own story, right? But Ed Wood, it's my understanding, was a more of a tragic character. He was an alcoholic. I believe he drank himself to death at an early age with health complications.
That's what the film indicates at the end. Yeah. Yeah,
correct. So, it was, it's a tragedy, but told through the lens of the people telling it, kind of, in a way. It's more of an homage than a biopic, if you will.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of what makes the film work so well, is that you can tell that it's not trying to be necessarily an objective, hard-hitting, gritty look at, the life of Ed Wood and the ups and downs. Because even the film alludes to, after Plan 9 from Outer Space, it mentions that he and his wife had a difficult relationship as a result of his tumultuous career with a lot of ups and downs and bouts of alcoholism and depression and all of that, but we're not here to go into that because, and you put it perfectly, none of us are villains in our own story. And this film very much stays within the purview of Ed Wood himself, right?
Right.
Everything is seen through his plucky, optimistic vision. Everyone is, sort of beautiful and has their own qualities in life, right? Like he's a very optimistic dude. You can tell that he's got a great respect for humanity, as well as maybe some of those people that live on the outskirts, right? For various reasons. And of course him, having his upbringing and, having this affinity for wearing women's clothing puts him naturally on the outskirts of that society. So, him existing there, obviously, he not being the villain in his own story, he's going to carry sympathy for those like him around them. And even those that, take it the next step to embracing transgenderism and all of that, and the bunny character played by Bill Murray, and again, that's one of the things that I enjoyed most about it is it's like, especially, we talked about on the other episodes, we've looked like Buffalo 66 or plenty of these 90 films where, you go back and it's like, your friends and neighbors, you go back and it's like, wow, there's some like really ugly stuff going on here that we didn't pick up on at the time because either we were too young or more than likely we just weren't socially conditioned to look at it as such. And so it was really nice to be able to see that like the bunny character wasn't just a sort of comedic character that was to be the butt of all the jokes. Like, oh, let's all laugh at Bill Murray wanting to be a woman. It was just presented as this is who he is and this is what he wants. And he's a little bit quirky and that's kind of funny, but it's not like, oh, let's all point and laugh at, the guy that wants to be a girl type thing, which again, for 1993 or 1994, whenever this came out, is really refreshing to go back to because it's definitely not always the case.
Yeah. Culturally speaking, the 90s, was a transitionary period, no pun intended, where a lot of things were, you think of the 80s, 70s and 80s, especially the 80s, and everything was kind of not spoken of. It was like, you didn't see a lot of gay characters or trans characters in, the public spotlight. And so even though they've always been around, behind the scenes and they've always existed, we didn't really give them a mic and a stage to go, do their thing. But then
this
in the 90s, they started
our military was don't ask, don't tell, and that's our own military, right?
Right.
Like,
that's a great point.
You can totally die for us. Just don't admit you're gay, please and thank you.
That was during the Clinton administration, right?
Exactly,
that all that was going on. Correct. Yeah, and all through the 90s. Don't ask, don't tell. And then Ellen came out. That was all the rage, and she was shunned and lost her job and all of that. And so as the 90s were a period when we, everything started to come to the surface and we were dealing with it in various ways through society. And it's unfortunate, but you're absolutely right. In many cases the way we dealt with it was making, people like that the brunt of the joke for their, the way they live. And so it wasn't until we really crossed the threshold into, the late aughts, early 2010s that we really started to, gay marriage has only been around for a short bit. So these are all very modern concepts that we take for granted, or I personally take for granted in my own personal views. So it's very interesting to, again, have seen this portrayed way back in 1994. And I do wonder if it had something to do with the R rating. That's very curious.
I wouldn't be surprised if it did. And also, I think we need to remember that a huge part of the way that, they're not made the brunt of the jokes or anything is, Tim Burton, and specifically saying, hey, I respect this guy. Like, I don't want to make fun of him being a transvestite. I want us to understand this was a part of him and it was okay. And it's got a motivation, right? He even says, like, when I was younger, my mom really wanted a girl. And so she used to dress me up in women's clothing. And so now it's this stress response and it makes me feel comfortable and all of that. So, if Tim Burton didn't have the respect for Ed Wood, it would have been much easier for him and other people to play around with these, again, as joking elements. But because he's got such reverence for the protagonist, and this is an aspect of the protagonist's psyche, he's then going to factor that into the film's tone and the film's point of view. So props to Tim Burton
and
for
even
maintaining that.
His reverence to the misfit, or the outcast, or the cast aside person. You look through his whole catalog, and that's his whole thing. And that's what makes his movies so enjoyable, because I think we could all relate to that in some way, shape, or form. We've all been that. We've all been laughed at or been the misfit at certain points in our life. And so I think that harkens back to a very primal thing that's inside all of us, is to show pathos for those people when it's portrayed like that in a Tim Burton film with heart, whether it's Pee Wee Herman, whether it's, even, the way he portrayed Bruce Wayne as Batman, was an outcast. He lived alone. He always ate alone. He was a lonely guy. When he finally had dinner with Vicky Vale, he admits to her, I don't think I've ever eaten dinner in this room before. Could you please pass the salt? And it's this big, long, comedically long dinner table, and he's all lonely, sunken in at the end of the table. So even Batman, he's portraying as a outcast or misfit. Edward Scissorhands, obviously, and on it goes. So, Winona Ryder's character in Beetlejuice, all his movies kind of surround or circulate around, the misfit character. And so as such, coming back to Ed Wood, he was able to handle these concepts with sensitivity and a lot of heart. And never once when you're watching this film, I know we have the benefit of modern eyes, but you don't look at it and think anything of it. You're just like, you're rooting for all of these people all the way through.
Absolutely. And that's also a reflection of the screenplay. The screenplay is well structured in the way that it develops out a lot of these relationships. It definitely doesn't have a strict through line. As a matter of fact, it kind of jumps around a little bit without calling attention to it. Sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't realize it was like 6 months later, but yeah, okay, cool. I'm up to speed now. Got it. So there's a number of liberties that it takes with regards to that. But in terms of the way that it uses this pastiche of scenes to build out the relationship and show us the evolution, both of Ed Wood as a professional filmmaker, but most importantly with regard to his relationship with Bela Lugosi, which is really just the crux and the heart of this movie. And, these are two people that, really need each other at the end of the day, because in essence, they validate each other's existence, right? Ed Wood is this guy who can't get anybody to take him seriously, but one of his personal heroes who happens to do the thing that he loves comes and gives him that validation and, comes to appreciate what he's trying to do. Would he do that if he wasn't a morphine addict? Probably not, right? But circumstances have driven them together, and I think that's true of any relationship in life, whether you're on the good side of things or the bad side of things or whatever, pretty much for the most part, we're existing within people that are, in our own personal stratosphere as well. And so you've got these two people who their aspirations are huge, but their current position is small, but by working with one another, they make each other feel bigger and they make each other feel confident and respected and give them that validation. And especially no more so than Bella, who at this point has nobody in his life, right? He's literally just going home by himself and shooting up morphine, and that's his entire life. He has nobody. He's about to lose his house. So for Ed Wood to come in and really just show him genuine friendship, even if maybe at first it's inspired by a certain, reverence or, oh, this guy can help sell my movie. But the way that they end up just coming to care for one another, it's all done very organically. There's no ham-fisted moment where, all of a sudden one of them does something for the other one and now they're the best friends in the world, right? It's not just one of those switch things. You just see this slow progression of them really coming to learn to love one another. And so I really appreciated the way that the screenplay handled that aspect of it, even if it was somewhat liberal with the temporal aspects of the plot line.
Sure. But even though it was taking liberties with, again, looking at this story through rose-colored glasses and kind of Ed Wood's take or kind of seeing it through his eyes, if nothing else, then I will say it's my understanding. I was delighted to find out when I was doing research for this show that it did very literally translate a lot of the scenes from his films and even Bela Lugosi going into rehab. There's a famous photo. I guess Bela Lugosi was the first celebrity to have come out and publicly check himself into rehab. That had never been done before. Just the shame of it all. You know what I mean? You're a Hollywood titan. You would never be seen in rehab. And so, but he was seeking help and he was a vulnerable person and he thought he could help other people. And so there's a very famous photo, I guess it was circulating through all the rags and tabloids that Bela Lugosi wanted taken. He requested photographers of him looking all frail and sunken and after checking himself into rehab. That scene was portrayed in the film. And then a lot of Ed Wood's scenes that, when they're showing the behind the scenes of him, filming these, Glenn or Glenda or Plan 9 from Outer Space or, some of these movies, you can go on YouTube and they have side-by-side comparison of both scenes. And it's almost like shot for shot remake. It's absolutely incredible how detail oriented Tim Burton was and the respect and care he was treating the source material. I thought that was very respectable.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, if I have any complaint about the screenplay, it's just the very end where you know, I'm not generally a fan of like what I'll call the dragnet ending, right? Where it's like,
Sure.
you know, freeze frame, you know, Joseph went on to graduate from school and blah, blah, blah. And then it, like, you know, Tina, you know, got married at 26, da, da, da. So
the Animal House ending. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there is that aspect of it. It's also unfortunate too, because I really feel like I was thinking that they could have very easily done a sort of Killing of a Chinese Bookie, right?
Sure.
Where there would be those scenes where it's like just him and all the girls upstairs, like either before or after a performance, and they're kind of just reflecting on their situation, you know? I thought we could have gotten maybe a scene like that, you know, maybe they all go out to dinner after the screenplay or after the movie premiere, and then, you know, we kind of track down and it sort of, you know, everyone sort of talks about where they're going, and maybe that would have been a little bit more, or because it just kind of ends, you know? Sometimes there's those movies where they just end, and I think it's because structurally, like if we wanted to break it down in terms of like our actual beats and stuff, there is there's a final beat known as descending action. And it's basically the time between the final climax and the end of the movie where you just kind of bring things down, right? You just lower the volume to let us go ahead and fade out. And famously, we've talked about how a lot of like Japanese films don't do that, right? Like a lot of the Kurosawa films that we've seen and talked about, especially High and Low, right? Like they're just like, okay, movie's over, we're done. There's no descending action. There's no like, hey, let's just come down and have a brief scene where the protagonist reflects on what happened and kind of wraps it up for us as the audience, right? Almost like that your closing paragraph of your essay, you know? But this didn't have that. This was just kind of like, okay, we're done, and here's the dragnet ending for all these guys. So just missed the landing for me on that.
I agree. Yeah.
I would have liked a little bit more organic.
I would tend to agree with you on that. Yeah.
So, but let's also discuss real quick too, before we go, is Tim Burton's direction, right? Because this is arguably the least Tim Burton-y film of his entire career.
Sure.
And even he admits that it's one of his best, he feels it's one of his best films that he's ever made. I would agree with that. But none of the usual visual flourishes are here that are present. Like there's no sense of macabre. There's no sense of the psychedelic. I you know, if you had to say there was kind of a Tim Burton hallmark, maybe the fact it's shot in black and white, but that's not necessarily the fact that it's like black and white per se, so much as it's like an artistic decision it seems like he would make for the material, you know?
A lot of the one source lighting or very gothic lighting, you know, it's very, a lot of shadows in this movie that exist. So I would say the look of it kind of maybe a little bit, but it is the least Tim Burton-y vibe, in so much as it's not quite as whimsical. They're just people doing things, you know. It doesn't exist in this fantasy land like Edward Scissorhands or Batman or Mars Attacks or any number of his other Edward, you know. So Sleepy Hollow. So the fact that it exists in Hollywood, you know, kind of just right there. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It was like Tim Burton light. It was good.
You know, it's funny because I was thinking about it, and the way the film is made, it's sort of almost a very classic Hollywood film. Just the way that it's shot, the way it's presented, the way it's edited, all of that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it, and I think that also falls in line with that sense of reverence that Tim Burton had for Ed Wood, right? I think that another filmmaker would be like, oh, here's this weird guy. Let's show him how weird he was. And like, here he is being weird again, right? And I feel like Tim Burton's like, no, dude, like everybody else would point out, I want to show just how normal this guy was. I want to take all these supposedly weird ass things from his cross-dressing to his horrible films and all of this, and I want to normalize it, and I want to celebrate it. I want to present him as, I read somewhere in one of the reviews that I had read that he's presented as a Frank Capra protagonist, where it's just like one of those guys that you can't help but root for, but he's also kind of a loser, but that's also why you're rooting for him, because like he doesn't know it and he's just trying his damned hardest, right? And that's the thing, you know, he tries so hard throughout this entire film.
He does.
But I think that, again, you know, to go full Tim Burton, quote unquote, with it, right, would be a disrespect to that, because again, Tim Burton's like, I'm going to show him the reverence we would show a president or a Steven Spielberg or, you know, any sort of classic Hollywood figure, you know, Orson Welles. I'm going to shoot it like that. And I think it really works.
Who's the tragic character from The Simpsons? Is it Lionel Lutz?
Lionel Hutz, the lawyer?
Lionel Hutz, yes.
Or are you talking about Gil?
That's all. Oh, maybe I am talking about Gil. Okay.
Because there's Lionel Hutz, who's the lawyer. That was Phil Hartman. But then there's Gil, who was like, please, God, I really need this
That's
sale,
the one I'm
man.
talking
They're
about,
going to
is
take my
Gil.
car.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Gil.
We need a Tim Burton Gil movie.
Tim Burton's Death of a Salesman.
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and then as we do kind of wrap this up too, I do just want to call out real quick the screenwriters who are Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski. I'm sure I butchered that name, but we've dropped everyone else's name, so let's make sure to give them their props as well. They wrote a very compassionate screenplay at a time when such subject matter really wasn't. They showed great affinity for their character, and apparently the script had been going around for a little bit too, so this wasn't one of those things. My understanding is they really drove the creation of the ideation of this movie. And then Tim Burton found out and was like, I have to do this film. That dude's like my hero, as opposed to Tim Burton, like striving to tell the story and looking for filmmakers to write it and capture his vision and all of that. So
makes sense.
Let's go ahead and get into our 3 adjectives. Ryan, go ahead and break that down real quick for any of our new listeners and viewers, and then give us your 3 adjectives.
Well, just real quick for our new viewers. This is a very quick summarization. If you had just seen this film and you were talking to your friends and you were trying to describe it in just a couple words or a quick phrase, what would your little adjective be to describe this film? And I'll give you an example. Mine is whimsically tragic, because I think that's exactly what it is. That's pretty on the nose. The next one is meta Burton, because normally he is the weird little guy that's telling all these fantastical stories, but this time he was a serious guy that was telling a story about a weird little guy that was telling these fantastical stories. So this was kind of meta
playing a dude, right?
Right. So, and then the last one is I get high with a little help from my friends, because it was a wonderful ensemble feature. I think that every piece of this puzzle was necessary and added to. Nothing was really extraneous. And just when you think you've seen it all, Bill Murray shows up, and who doesn't love that? So, yeah, high with a little help from my friends. And how about you, Jason? What do you got?
All right, yeah, so for my 3 adjectives, first one, unconventional friendship. Next one, creative enthusiasm. And lastly, respect for good-natured lack of convention. If I had to sum up what really is the crux of this film, it's all of those things. It's about connecting with people who maybe, have no one else in the world that they would connect with, but they find each other. We've got just the unparalleled passion, the unbridled enthusiasm that Ed Wood has for making movies, even though he has no business doing so. And we've also just, again, got this embracing from both the filmmakers as well as the characters within the movie for anything that's sort of unconventional and different and dares to exist outside of the mainstream, but does so with good-natured confidence. And, it's just, that's the way that their particular star burns, and in his case, it burned brightly. So it's unfortunate that, he had to have the ending that he did, but obviously he inspired a lot of people along the way, none more so than Tim Burton. And so it's a really fitting way to give him a little tip of the cap where, otherwise he might have gone unregarded or disregarded or, been given a certain lack of respect, another filmmaker might have brought to the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting just as a quick aside and wrap up that, this was 94. So this was right at the sweet spot of indie cinema. Miramax was on the come up. You got filmmakers like Tarantino and Kevin Smith doing their thing. We're about to get into filmmakers like Wes Anderson and all those guys, P.T. Anderson and some of these guys. So, great time to homage the original OG indie filmmaker of Ed Wood. The time, the set and setting of 1994 when this film came out, 93 when it got made, I think is important. I think that was, there was a lot going on in film history that kind of harkened back to those roots of renegade style filmmaking, guerrilla style filmmaking. So, it's really shocking and kind of shitty that this film didn't make a lot of money, but hey, that Tim Burton guy landed on his feet. So did Johnny Depp. I think they'll be all right.
Everyone associated with the film was fine. Martin won. We should have our own little thing, right? Martin Landau went on to win an Oscar. Johnny Depp went on to make hundreds of millions of dollars with Pirates of the Caribbean, etc.
Yeah, right.
Tim Burton had a real weird relationship with Helena Bonham Carter where they lived in different houses next to each other.
And then went on to date Monica Bellucci, and on it goes. Yeah.
So yeah, wonderful
They're
film,
all going to be
wonderful
fine.
experience.
They're all going to be fine.
Everyone's doing fine. Let's go ahead and formalize this with our star ratings, Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and give this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. Shouldn't shock anyone. I loved this movie. Like I said, I do wish it would have stuck the landing. I think if it did, I might have been a little bit closer to the full 5. But as it stands, wonderful, wonderful movie. Would watch this again tomorrow in a heartbeat.
Sure.
Just loved the characters, loved the respect for the material and all involved. 4.5 out of 5 stars. What you got, buddy?
I'm giving it 4.25 for all the same reasons.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. Solid rating, solid movie. So yeah, for everyone, do want to remind you, if you haven't yet, please do go ahead, like this video, subscribe to our channel. If the movie sounded like it appealed to you, please do go check out Ed Wood. It's a wonderful movie. We encourage you all to see it. And then after that, be sure to visit esotericacinema.com for more content, as well as to contact us directly if you don't want to do so here on the old YouTube boards. For Esoterica Cinema, I'm Jason Peters. He's Ryan Seybold. Enjoy the movies.